welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. Now, this episode is one that I think a lot of people have been waiting for a while. So much so that I guarantee you that a lot of people probably skipped over the stories just so I can get into the main topic. But I urge anybody who is still listening to continue to listen to what I'm saying because, believe it or not, there are some things that are happening in the news that I personally want to discuss. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, we're going to be talking about a very much lesser known story involving Mexico. You see, because remember, Mexico, like AMLO, has been trying to do some electoral reforms within Mexico. The biggest one being that he wants to change the INE, as it is right now, into a different type of electoral organization. I think just point blank he wants to abolish the INE in favor of a brand new electoral body, with also the added idea of trying to reform Mexican elections a little bit more, shrinking the amount of legislators, and having the members of this new electoral board be chosen via a referendum or a popular vote system, rather than being directly appointed by the president. Well, you see, as is usually the case, not everybody agreed with this sort of system, and there were some protests against AMLO because of this. However, AMLO, of course, did the typical response of they're upholding the classist, racist, neoliberal establishment of Mexico, which may or may not be true. Though, to be fair, it's not like I'm necessarily agreeing with AMLO's, all of AMLO's reforms in this area. I don't necessarily know. Personally, if I were in charge of an electoral body, I'd want to expand the legislature rather than shrink it, because there's this sort of idea that AMLO would, if he shrunk the legislature, he would conveniently shrink the parts that are his opposition, but I don't necessarily know if he's going to do that. I don't think he would. Plus, this is sort of playing into the idea of the democratic backsliding that people accuse all Latin American leftists of doing, conveniently ignoring Nayib Bukele, who literally just announced that despite the fact that he was literally not allowed to, he's going to run for another term. So yeah, there's not much else I can really say on that. It's just a thing that happened. Speaking of things that happened, remember the Palestinian-American journalist that was assassinated? Well, it turns out that the FBI and the CIA are actually looking into this thing. They decided they were going to officially conduct a investigation within this with what happened to determine what actually happened. However, turns out that Israel is not exactly too keen on it. The defense minister, Benny Gantz, denouncing the inquiry as interference in Israel's internal affairs, and he made it clear to the American representatives that we stand behind the IDF soldiers, that we will not cooperate with any external investigation. Going on to say the decision of the U.S. Department of Justice to investigate the unfortunate death of Sirine Abu Akleh is a grave mistake. The IDF conducted an independent and professional investigation, which was presented to the Americans who shared the details. And the article goes on to state that due to this, it's basically just confirming everything that is going on. One of the big things people have been trying to say is that this is a cover-up by Israel to negate any sort of bad things that are going on. And remember, this is from the government that was supposed to be to Netanyahu's left. This is supposed to be the government that opposes Netanyahu. So many people are saying that this could actually potentially literally strain the relationship between Israel and America. It probably won't. It more than likely won't. It's because if America didn't really give a shit about killed Palestinians, why would they care now? I guess that's because that she's an American as well, so maybe they would care a little bit. But anyways, there's not much else I could say. Let's move on to another bigger thing that happened. Russia launched a missile at Ukraine, and because they're in the middle of a war, that's kind of what happens. But what happened instead of it hitting Ukraine was that it accidentally flew a little bit further than it should have, and it actually hit Poland. And due to this, many people were speculating that Poland would enact NATO Article 5, which basically indicates that any attack on a NATO country basically pushes the rest of NATO to get involved. And people were saying that this would be a very big step into possible nuclear war, World War III. But as far as I can tell, that hasn't happened yet, and I don't think it will. Probably because, the thing is, most of the rest of the world actually has, level heads on this. That's why every single conflict post-Cold War has, again, been a Cold War, at least between superpowers, because legitimately, if it becomes a hot war, then things will just inevitably snowball into a very, very bad thing. Like, that's why Russia hasn't really done anything, because they keep threatening that, oh, we're going to launch a nuke this time, don't interfere, we're going to launch the weapons. It's like, they're not going to do it because Putin wants to be remembered in 10 years. He wants people to look in history textbooks and then think, Vladimir Putin's such a great man and great, wonderful human being. He wants to be put next to pictures of, like, Stalin and Lenin, not necessarily for, like, political reasons, but, like, for the reason that they are admired as basically gods within their own country. And Putin wants to do that for himself, which is why he's never going to do, like, full-on nuclear conflict. Because if the world is dead, then there is no one to read history books with pictures of him, Lenin, and Stalin. But anyways, not much else I could say on this. Ukraine war bad. Ukraine should not be invaded. US, NATO shouldn't get more involved. No World War III. But anyways, now let's go on to domestic policy, because we're going to be talking about some very interesting things that happened. For starters, we're going to talk about the incoming Congress has essentially been pushing for a lot of different, basically, one of the big things that happened was this is around the time where, the Republicans and Democrats are going to start solidifying who their leaders are going to be going into the next Congress. And we saw some interesting debacles that happened. First, we saw the Republicans have two of their, Trumpy type guys, Andy Biggs and Rick Scott, mount bids against Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell. They ultimately failed, even failing to get certain people who should have, quote-unquote, been in certain rounds of voting. Like, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene voted for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker on the condition that she gets her committee positions back, even though in any other scenario, she probably would have ran for the position herself. But they were getting, very vocal, very, we're going to take a stand, and I basically, during all this that was happening, I basically said, House progressives need to start announcing, House and Senate progressives need to start, pushing for, speakership and minority leader and majority leader changes, now. We need to start, talking about this stuff, right now. Especially since the last cycle, Nancy Pelosi said that that would be her last term as speaker. And many people were wondering, will she actually follow through? And then November 17th, she announced that she would follow through. And she announced that she would be retiring from her speakership position. But in a shock of all shocks, it was also revealed that Steny Hoyer would retire from his position. Okay, granted, he technically had to retire from his position because his position was majority leader, which would then mean that if he's in the minority, he'd be minority leader. But since Pelosi would be the leader of the Democratic Party, she would have been minority leader. Basically, he was in the position lower than Nancy, and he was only in the leadership position because Nancy was speaker. But now that Dems don't have the speakership, the highest position is their leadership position. And then coincidentally, Jim Clyburn, the majority whip, also announced that he would be retiring from his position. This was an enticing position for progressives because all of Democratic leadership, the old AF people, were announcing that they would be retiring from those positions that they had held for a long time. So now it was time for progressives to step up and try to claim at least one of those positions. But then there was also some more, like Democratic Congress Chair Hakeem Jeffries was term limited, so he couldn't run for his position again. So people were thinking, maybe something's there. And certain other people who were in other positions within the Democratic Party were floated as potential people to rise up, so maybe you could get those smaller positions instead, like assistant leader or Dem Caucus vice chair. And I made the argument that Democratic progressives need to start choosing some of these positions to go for. However, the Democratic Party was very clear with their plans. You see, because one of the big things that the Democratic Party's been trying to do was they're trying to paint themselves as, even though they lost, they're trying to paint themselves as the more, business-ready party. Because, the Republicans, they're fighting with each other. The Trump wing and the moderate wing of the GOP are fighting each other. The Democrats just want a clear transition. They just want to go from one person to the next with an any problems or any debacles. Except that's kind of not possible when you have a ton of people who want to rise up in leadership. And a couple of names have been floated for these positions: Pete Aguilar, Catherine Clark, Hakeem Jeffries, Pramila Jayapal, and Adam Schiff. Were basically all big names that were floated around for some form of Democratic leadership position, as those were the people who seemingly behind the scenes were gearing up for that sort of change. But one by one, each of them started shifting and changing their minds. Schiff almost immediately announced that he wouldn't be interested in any position because he felt that he has a better chance at seeking the 2024 California Senate race. Jeffries, Clark, and Aguilar, basically all three kind of accepted that they would be in one of the positions. They didn't really care which one they would go for. And Jayapal, even though I kept saying Jayapal needs to do something, she made the stunning decision to announce that she would run for another term as CPC chairwoman. And I said it bluntly, point blank right there. Progressives can literally kiss any form of leadership goodbye for 30 more years. Jayapal was literally the only progressive who had the ability to run for any sort of leadership position that actually wanted it. Every time I try to bring up a progressive running for leadership position, almost immediately everybody brings up AOC. AOC says that she doesn't want to. It's I'm not talking about AOC. I'm talking about Jayapal. And they're like, oh yeah, but we don't like Jayapal. It's it doesn't matter if you like Jayapal or not. Jayapal could have won. Jayapal has been a pretty initiated member of the Democratic Party for a while. She was the only member of the progressive wing of the party that actually could have done something to mount a viable bid. And many people actually argue that she was on her way to do so, but the only reason that she has rescinded that idea is because of that Ukraine letter. And it's just absolutely ridiculous that Ukraine letter is the thing that killed any potential for progressives to have that sort of momentum. I keep telling people progressives need to run for a leadership position, and then I keep getting a bunch of random people in my replies no, but you see they can't really do that. And it's you have to try or else you will never succeed. The Tea Party did this sort of visual momentum oh, we're gonna try and primary and get rid of John Boehner. But then what ended up happening is John Boehner resigned. He resigned because the Tea Party grew too viable for him to even stand a chance against them. And the left needs to grow that backbone. They need to do something. The fact that no Democratic left-wing person has even attempted to go for any leadership position is ridiculous. The closest thing you can get is Joe Neguse announced that he would be running for Democratic caucus chair, which you would think, good, but here's the thing. Pete Aguilar he either has or is going to announce his intentions to run for that seat as well, and Democrats are already on their way to make sure that Joe Neguse doesn't run for this seat. They're saying, Joe, run for something else. Stay in the position that you are in right now. And Joe Neguse, he's 10 times more establishment or whatever than Jayapal ever is. And the fact that no left-wing member of Congress even attempted for a leadership position when the leadership positions were basically gift-wrapped for anybody to take them is just absolutely terrible. Somebody should have been the sacrificial lamb. I don't care if it was Jayapal or Roe or AOC or any of them. They should have tried. You miss all the swings that you don't take. Then you'll get some people who go, the committee positions. Oh, great. They got to be chair number 17 in a house that will never pass anything that they want. Then they'll even try to say, but Porter will be in a good... I don't give a fuck about Porter. Porter is absolutely worse than Jayapal ever is. And you're expecting me to be happy about a Porter position on a committee? Give me a break. So yeah, kiss any potential of a progressive administration goodbye, because no leadership position is going to a progressive. And the progressives just stood by and watched the one opportunity that they had go away, which is the exact opposite of what this Republican is doing. A Republican from West Virginia Alex Mooney, a representative, has already announced that he intends to challenge Joe Manchin in 2024 because he sees that Joe Manchin is unpopular within his own party, unpopular with Republicans, and he's just wildly unpopular. So of course, he sees this opportunity that is gift wrapped to him and immediately announces that he will run against him. Because that's what you do. When you see the opportunity that is gift wrapped for you, you will go. We're going to see a ton of Republicans run against Kyrsten Sinema as well, because Sinema is incredibly unpopular with Republicans, incredibly unpopular with Democrats, incredibly unpopular with independents, incredibly unpopular with everybody in her state. They're going to run against her, and they're going to try and put everything in their power to make sure that their candidate wins and she doesn't. And the same thing with Joe Manchin. When you have an opportunity, you take it, unless you're completely freaking brain dead. And luckily, that is the only 2024 announcement that happened this week. No. Nothing else happened this week involving the 2024 election cycle. No.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
November 15th, 2022 was when the shadow primary ended and the real primary has officially begun. November 15th, 2022 was when the GOP Civil War also began, because now we're getting people from all across the GOP sphere going extremely ham on each other because of a very, very big thing. Because, as you can probably guess, Trump being very much blamed for the Republican losses in the recent midterm elections has led to many members of the Republican Party basically go, we don't really want Trump anymore. And we're getting a ton of people who were once Trump sycophants basically officially break their ties with them, ranging from Fox News, NY Post, both owned by the same man, Mike Pence, Candace Owens. Basically, the entire GOP establishment punditry wing has basically turned their back on Trump, because now they have a reason to turn their back on Trump. These were all the same people who hated Trump prior to him winning the Republican nomination. And now that Trump isn't the Republican nominee anymore, and people are actually even seeing that he is become a detriment and not an asset to the party, now they can turn around and go, hey, we've hated Trump the whole time. But they've also indicated, if he's the Republican nominee, they're not going to do anything about it. And the only reason why they have officially grown this backbone to oppose Trump now is because now they have a new person to bend their knees to, Ron DeSantis. Because Ron DeSantis is literally the only person in the GOP that can beat Donald Trump now. Sorry, Corey Stapleton, but you don't really have a chance. And with that, there also came announcements of 10 more Trump investigations. Merrick Garland did this thing where he announced it was a special counsel for another Trump investigation, but it's guys, if the investigations, the 10 million investigations are useless unless you're actually going to jail him. The only thing of note in that one was that during it, Merrick Garland said the only reason why he was doing a special counsel and not actually doing the investigation himself was because he let it slip that at least to him that the current president intends to run in the upcoming cycle, which is a subtle hint that Joe Biden might run again in 2024, which may or may not ruin this list. But we're going to do this list anyways before anything official happens, just because I've been teasing it for a long time. I, like many people, have desperately tried in vain to make sure that the 2024 election was not on my brain, but I did end up making my way to the Wikipedia page of the 2024 election many, many times, just so I could make it very clear, who is at least in the workings or, in the whispers of potentially running in 2024. Basically, I've been looking into, a lot of the stuff to see, who has been mentioned as potential names, especially on the progressive side of things. And it was delightful because we were at the stage where basically everything was being thrown at the wall to see what sticks. And due to this, a lot of names that you might be familiar with, that you might not be familiar with, ones that you might like or hate, have basically been thrown into the field as potential 2024 candidates. And every so often you'll see a name pop up, then deny they intend to run for president, but then their name will pop back up into contention because, people announcing in 2021 that they weren't going to run for president in 2024 might change their mind. You might see some names pop up that you might be familiar with just because they're like just big names in politics. Then you might get like a couple of oddball ones that are like, oh, this is interesting. Every so often you get like a rising star person that's thrown in there, like, oh, Like, for example, like very recently, many people have even been floating at the idea of the governor-elect of Maryland, Wes Moore, to be running for president. Like, this is a guy who hasn't even served as governor yet, and presidential speculation has thrown him into potentially running for president in 2024. One name that popped up was a person by the name of Mitch Landrieu. Do you know who Mitch Landrieu is? No? He was the governor of New Orleans, who apparently just became a favorite name to be thrown in presidential speculation. He was speculated to run for president in 2016, 2020, and even his name's been thrown out for 2024. And it's like, who is this man? This is a mayor of a city, like not even like the mayor of New York City. Like, I mean, usually you save that for like the mayor of NYC, and even then that's a stretch because the mayor of NYC is usually not a good stepping stone to running for president. You'll get favorites of particular camps, like people who will just desperately try to make a person a thing, but then it's very clear that this is not really like massive momentum. This is clearly just someone trying to make it a thing. John Hickenlooper was one of them. He was never expected to be like a serious presidential candidate, but the media just kept touting him out like, this is the guy that Democrats need to win. Like, yeah, that does usually happen. Like, if a traditionally red state gets like a blue anything, that person will immediately be brought up like, this person could win. Like, that's why Wes Moore is in, because like, he was like the governor. He's being replaced. Like, he's replacing a Republican-held state. And you might say, Maryland's a Republican-held state? In the governorship, yes. In North Carolina's governor, Roy Cooper, has also been floated as that. Because, like, it was a split ticket. Like, everybody noticed this. Like, Roy Cooper had, like, Trump voters and the voters of, like, the extremely conservative lieutenant governor vote for him. So people were like, maybe he can work his magic there. Especially considering North Carolina is a swing state. In fact, one funny thing that happened that is kind of interesting is that it became a little bit of a debacle on our campaigns, but it was because there was a poll that was like conducted that showed like a ton of people who were in the Democratic field and basically like, hey, if any of these people ran for president, who would you vote for? And 2% of the people in that poll said that they wanted to vote for Ilhan Omar. Now, Ilhan Omar is constitutionally ineligible to run for president due to the fact that she's not a natural-born citizen of the United States. And that poll was included on our campaigns, either by me or by someone else. But, like, basically, that poll was just, people were like, of course she can't run. It's like, yeah, but, like, her name was floated in a poll, so of course she'd be included. Like, that's basically what our campaign site does. Like, whoever is included as in speculation, they usually just get added to the list. But anyways, I should say one thing. Like, 100%, I don't think Joe Biden should run. Like, I mean, I've heard some people make the arguments like Joe Biden should run because he is the incumbent president and he would have an advantage going in. I would argue that that might be true, but he also has the baggage of the current administration. Like, a lot of people don't necessarily like Joe Biden, so he has the baggage of being Joe Biden. Honestly, I really do believe that Joe Biden's win in 2020 was a fluke. Like, if any other situation happened, then maybe he wouldn't have won. But then again, you might argue maybe 2024 will be also an extraordinary, like, position when there have been legitimate fears of, like, if you vote for these Republican candidates, you might not have a United States going forward. Since that resonated with a lot of people in 2022, with that very realistic point of, like, oh yeah, this thing that's been, like, law of the land for, like, thousands of years, Roe v. Wade, has now been overturned. Like, that made people realize, things are getting real. But I don't necessarily know if Joe Biden has the power to, like, solidify that. Which is why the title of this video is going to include the hashtag #Don'tRunJoe, because I don't believe that Joe Biden should run in 2024. Also because that means that a progressive would have a better chance of actually being able to run and win. Now, I see all of you typing in the comments right now, come on, you're deliberating, just get to the point. And I most certainly will. But before that, I'm going to mention the people who 100% should not run, and who, if any people you know are considering supporting any of these people, you should definitely 100% mock them, ridicule them, and cut them out of your life. The first one we'll go into is the least egregious, probably, Katie Porter. Many people have been floating the idea of Katie Porter running for president in 2024, but here's the thing, Katie Porter is literally just Elizabeth Warren 2.0. I mean, I didn't even consider her part of the left until people were starting to go around being like, look at all these good left-wing stars, and included like Katie Porter. It's like, I've never considered Katie Porter part of the left. Like, almost immediately, she became very clearly, like, not part of the left. The first vote that she did that got my attention was the fact that she joined with the right-wing Democrats to vote for a Tea Party or Ken Buck's amendment to undermine Ro Khanna's Yemen bill. Ever since taking office, she has voted for every single NDAA with the exception of one, 2020, 2021, and 2022. And the 2021 NDAA actually had a thing, it was sent back to the House, and then she voted for it again. She voted to reauthorize the U.S. Freedom Act. She voted against Ilhan Omar's bill to end the war in Afghanistan. She voted against AOC's amendment to study the medical benefits of certain drugs, and she voted against Cory Bush's amendment allowing people in jail to vote. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that she doesn't have any good things about her. She is literally Elizabeth Warren's AOC, which means she has all of the benefits of Elizabeth Warren too. You know, one of the big, the only thing that most people seem to notice is she has the board that shows the corporate taxes. But very much like Elizabeth Warren, given the choice between actually substantially changing and reforming or downright replacing the system that we have now and keeping the system, she will choose the system. Next one, Ventura. I am so mad that the Vanguard specifically, I'm calling out the Vanguard, freak the Vanguard. The fact that you idiots are continuing to bring back the Ventura, stanness, when I spent literally the last cycle doing everything I could to show that the Ventura, love fest that lefties seem to have is completely ridiculous. The only reason that people on the left love Jesse Ventura is because some, borderline Nazi infiltrated the Green Party, completely lied about the Green Party process to try and make it seem like Jesse Ventura could get the Green Party nomination without actually running for the Green Party nomination, and without having any history in left-wing politics, spending his entire political career from the mid-90s to 2016 exclusively being a center-right libertarian who dabbled in very blatant obvious conspiracy theories, but because he randomly made the claim on Alex Jones' show, even though I spent the entirety of the 2016 cycle saying that I would vote for Gary Johnson, I actually voted for Jill Stein of the Green Party. Now all of a sudden every single lefty is literally just our greatest hero, Jesse Ventura. The Vanguard made a fucking ridiculous documentary talking about Jesse's rise, how he beat the duopoly. And it's notice how they don't talk about anything in regards to policy within that documentary, because if they did mention anything about policy, people on the left would immediately get turned off. Jesse Ventura has spent his entire career, ever since he left the governor's office, coasting on people dumb enough to think that he will run for president. He floated his name in every single presidential election since he left the Reform Party. 2000, 2004, 2008, 2016, 2012, 2020, and with every passing decade, he's suddenly slightly changed his political ideology, hitching himself to whatever political movement is popular at the time. In the 90s, he's this huge radical centrist. Third way Reform Party 100%. Then in the 2000s, all that centrism talk has basically gone out the window. Now his entire philosophy is anti-Iraq war. 2010s rolls around. Now he's this huge diehard Tea Party libertarian. And now with the 2020s, he's all of a sudden this huge left-wing icon. Now, any of this would be fine, well and good, if people weren't pretending that Ventura was a serious presidential candidate. As I've mentioned before, I said all this shit back in 2020. His entire career post-governorship has been reinvent myself for this new budding crowd, float myself as a potential presidential candidate for this crowd, use this airtime and publicity to promote a new book, a new movie, a new show, whatever. Make this huge deal like, oh, I'm the only person who can take down the two-party system. And then when it's time to actually do anything to even remotely run and actually try to take down the system, just chicken out at the last second. And people who are desperate for relevancy will keep coming back to Jesse because they have a coexisting ecosystem. Next absolute failure that you should not be doing anything to support in 2024, Jimmy Dore. There's really not much else I could say. Jimmy Dore is literally just a full-blown right-winger now. And, well, this is this is funny because I was actually one of the first people to probably even indicate I wanted Jimmy Dore for president, way back in the day. But it's he's essentially just become a right-wing podcaster. Look at any of his videos. He's literally just a right-wing anti-vax conspiracy nut. Basically, him and Jesse Ventura switch spots. That's hilarious. And the last one that you should 100% not be supporting in 2024 is Tulsi Gabbard. Again, very similar situation to Jimmy. She's literally just a Trump Republican. In fact, I only included her name in here because there's still a potential she might run for president in 2024. But most people are actually even thinking that she's probably just gearing up to be Trump's running mate. Whatever. It would not surprise me at this point. Now I hear you guys again in the comments deliberating. Come on, just get to it. Main topic. Let's go. And I will after I do one more thing, because there were, like I said, a lot of names were floated, a lot of names were put into contention, and I have to mention some that just didn't quite make the cut. These are, first I'm gonna go, briefly into explaining why I didn't think they would make the cut. I even give them, small little sections, because more than one person can sort of be put into this field. The first category, I would have to say, is this, I don't necessarily know how to describe it, basically, one thing people have been trying to do, a couple of people have been trying to do, is trying to, revision where progressivism can work, because most people always have that notion of progressivism only works deep blue cities, but we've had a lot of people try to prove progressivism or populism or left populism essentially it can work in other areas. It doesn't have to be exclusively in blue states in the north or California. This kind of stuff can work in rural red areas. The names that sort of been floated in this category would be someone like Charles Booker, Gary Chambers, or to a degree, Lucas Coons. And while yes, the idea of progressivism in the South is a good idea, or for Coons' case in the Midwest, this sort of energy, I think it could work potentially. The problem is, these guys, they have not necessarily been particularly successful in their fields for various reasons. Coons, because he just barely skirted by to getting the, nomination of his party. Booker, Charles Booker, he did manage to get the nomination in his second try for the Senate seat, but of course, it was in the deep red Kentucky, so he wasn't really guaranteed any success further down the line. Now, Chambers is interesting, because he technically is sort of, slowly gearing up and being, more powerful in his state. Because, remember, he used to be this guy who got, third place in a deep blue, area. But then, in the Senate race, he got second place. Now, granted, second place in this state is 17%, but Chambers is sort of gearing up and being a little bit more viable. Chambers is even being floated as a potential candidate in their upcoming gubernatorial election, because the Louisiana governor is going to not be viable to run again, and it's a Democrat-held seat, so people are actually worried, thinking, could this be a chance for Republicans to take it? And Chambers, he might be the guy to do it. But presidency-wise, I don't really see Chambers going there. The next category is sort of the progressive governors. Phil Murphy and Jay Inslee are the only ones I can think of for this category. There is one more, but I'll save him for a separate category. These two are arguably, in my opinion, probably the most progressive governors in the United States. Maybe. Not a lot of competition, so Yeah. But I mean, it seems that both of them did like pretty good jobs in their governorships. Jay Inslee was a pretty decent candidate in the 2020 field, and Phil Murphy sort of like leaned very heavy into the progressive crowd. So like, they could be cool ideas, but like, and they're not as radical enough to like maybe be viable to the Democratic like establishment or like other not so radical movements within the Democratic Party. But again, they're just not really there. Next one is sort of like the interesting category of the billionaire to destroy billionaires. And for this one, we have two people. Joe Sandberg, this really progressive billionaire that floated himself as a candidate in 2020, and J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois. Now, the latter is very confusing because J.B. Pritzker is not like a particularly progressive governor. Like, he seems to be like a normal Democratic governor, essentially. But what happened was Chapo Trap House basically began pushing really hard for J.B. Pritzker, and a lot of people started taking him seriously as a left-wing candidate. And the reason being is that the same thing happened to Mike Gravel when Gravel ran his 2020 bid. Like, Chapo Trap House started basically going like, man, Mike Gravel's really, really cool. And then a bunch of people basically said, hey, Mike Gravel, why don't you run for president in 2020? And he said, okie dokie. So many people were thinking like, oh, maybe he would be a good choice. Now, he's actually, like, interesting in some regards because, like, here's the thing. He's actually, like I said before, he's not a progressive. The only reason that people are even pushing him as, like, a viable candidate is literally just because, like, he's doing the bare minimum in a democratic state. And many people's standards have become so low that they'll literally just take that and run with it as a potential left-wing candidate. And similarly with Sandberg is money. Like, these guys, they have very deep pockets, so they could potentially run very serious, very viable bids. And Pritzker has been seen in some of these, like, areas that he could run a 2024 bid in, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case. And one more thing about Pritzker that I found interesting was that Pritzker was actually a congressional staffer to Terry Sanford, the former governor and senator from North Carolina. And Sanford's a pretty left-wing guy, so I guess to a degree, I could kind of see the appeal of Pritzker. The next category is second bananas in Congress. What do I mean by that? Well, we know how in Congress, like, a lot of the progressive momentum is behind Bernie, and in the House, a lot of progressive momentum is behind AOC. Many people have been floating the idea of maybe one of the other, like, their second compadres or compatriots to potentially run instead. Like, since those guys are very, very, very big and important in the, like, chambers, maybe these two could run in their stead. The two names floated are Jeff Merkley and Rashida Tlaib. Now, most Tlaib focus has really just been grassroots, and Merkley really was only floated like once in like a thing, and then he's never been floated again. But the thing is, like these two, they're not really as remembered as much in the media as like they're more big name compatriots. In fact, I did a poll looking into potential like 2024 candidates that my audience would like, and very early on, Rashida Tlaib was winning. She's clearly a favorite, and Merkley's obviously a pretty, like, I like Merkley, but the thing is, even though we like them, are they big enough to like mount the bid? I don't know. And the last two people that I floated as potential people in my mind were the progressive lieutenant governors turned Senate candidates. Those two, of course, being Mandela Barnes and John K. Fetterman. The latter, I was very especially leaning heavy on. The list that I have right now, very much the entire time, Fetterman was on the list. But it wasn't until I saw his 2020 debate with Dr. Oz that I basically went, I don't necessarily think he'll be a good candidate. Like, I'm very much rooting for him to win in the Senate, but this I don't necessarily think would be good for us. Like, I thought Fetterman would be a great candidate because I saw him campaigning. I've seen him like give speeches and stuff. I'm like, this guy has a good shot at winning, but now that is taken away from him, like, I don't think he has that momentum. And Mandela Barnes, I removed him. Like, I was basically like, I'll leave Mandela Barnes here for like the potential of maybe taking Fetterman's place. But then Mandela Barnes lost, so, I mean, we don't care about losers. Well, I mean, we don't care about certain losers. We care about some losers. But anyways, now I finally deliberated long enough. It's time for me to officially unveil the 10 progressives I think should run for president in 2024. Given all of the information that we have of people who are legitimately considering running for president and people's like draft campaigns and people like who are big names or whatever, taking all this in, I compiled the list of the 10 people I legitimately think could be good candidates or decent candidates for 2024. Right off the bat, I'm going to have to say a very controversial thing. All the way at number 10, we have Bernie Sanders. Before you get your nooses and pitchforks, let me explain. I, of course, love Bernie. I'm 100% a Bernie bro, Bernie fan, 100%. I was a 2-time Bernie or buster. If Bernie announces literally the day after this podcast comes out, I'm 100% on board with Bernie 2024. But I'm putting him low on this list for 2 reasons. One, it really does seem like it is truly past his time to run. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people are going to say, like, oh, but Biden's old and Trump's old. It's like, yes, but, like, I really do think that Bernie running in 2024 would be, it just doesn't seem right. Especially considering, like, it's sort of a criticism that I've levied towards other left-wing figures. We see this all the time, like Lula running for president in Brazil this time, and Cristina Kirchner might run for president of Argentina in the next cycle, and Evo Morales, whenever Bolivia runs its next cycle, he might run for president again. It's like, and then we had like Rafael Correa, who wanted to run for president in Ecuador in the latest election. Like, we seem to be very hyper-focused on our political figures when we should be moving past them and focusing on our ideas. But, like, I mean, again, we're all so stuck about Bernie. Like, it's like, even though I've said this, we all agree. I'm pretty sure everybody in the world who is a Bernie Sanders fan agrees 100% with that mentality. Like, yes, we should be moving past Bernie, and we should be focusing on a new person to lead the progressive movement, whatever. But we're all still 100% going to be backing Bernie if he ran, because we're so attached to him. None of this, like, lefty infrastructure that we have, the squad, a large progressive caucus, the progressive caucus in its entirety, Our Revolution, Justice Stems, DSA, like, most of these movements wouldn't exist without him. But he's also low on the list for one more reason. His Senate seat is also up for grabs in 2024. Now, Vermont is one of those states where you technically can run for 2 offices at the same time. But the thing is, I really don't think Bernie is the type of guy to do that. So there's a good chance that he won't run for the presidency and will instead seek re-election in the Senate. But there is a third road that has changed a little bit. You see, originally, I had the idea that Bernie might not even run for either, and that he would just fully retire in 2024. But now, as things sort of go on, I'm starting to think maybe Bernie might do something a little different. There is potential that I think that Bernie could potentially run a 3rd time for president as a Hail Mary. Sort of pull like an AMLO and Mélenchon, and with that, he would retire from the Senate, and then he would basically use this presidential run to, like, lead a new wave of progressive figures to take the Senate and take the House. Because there are a lot of Senate seats that are up for grabs in 2024 that have progressives being floated as potential candidates in those seats. And his own seat could be one of them, because he has like 27,000 more Bernies that could run in that seat. I most likely think that he would be backing like Dave Zuckerman in his Senate seat, considering Peter Welch is in the other Senate seat. The fact that he's still whispering makes me know that he is legitimately thinking of it. So I won't completely discount him, but I do think we should probably think about moving past it. Number 9, Nina Turner. The fact that she's still on this list is probably another indication of what I talked about in the last section, where I talked about like personal affection over the figure versus like actual viability. Because I think everybody on the left also loves Nina Turner. Like leading up to 2020, 2021, Nina Turner was 100% expected to be basically the next wave of the progressive movement. But her losing to Shontel Brown twice has basically moved that down to almost nothing. Not completely nothing, but the fact that she's on this list, even though she's basically wasted her political capital on 2 failed House races, should give you like some small indication of like, like if, like, I mean, the first run, that's one thing, but the freaking failed rematch, I'm still mad that Nina just went on for that immediate rematch. Like, not even gonna wait for a potential, like, future run. But it's like, no, not even gonna give them a chance to even slightly indicate, like, maybe we should look at this person to see if they actually are viable. Like, no, you immediately have to choose. Replace them even though they've basically done nothing, or me. It's like, I still love Nina 100%. But again, that was kind of a wasted move. The next one is another one that's going to give you a little bit of a oomph. Marianne Williamson. We're leading with our best feet forward, my friends. Yes, I'm legitimately going to sit here and go like Crazy Crystal Lady's probably going to be our torchbearer for 2024. That shows you how dire our situation is. Now, sadly, Kyle Kalinske has been really pushing hard for Marianne Williamson 2024. And double unfortunately, she's probably the most likely person to run. Because unlike any of these other people who have like, actual political capital and like actual viability or whatever, Marianne literally has nothing. So running like a Don Quixote 2024 run would probably just be another step into her like claim of relevancy. Even if Biden does end up running, she seems very much likely to run. I mean, hopefully no, because she would probably be lower only if Nina and Bernie, I honestly would want to put her lower. But the fact that I want people to move beyond Bernie and the fact that Nina just wasted her capital on those 2 runs, that's the only thing that propels Marianne to be above like a -10. That and the fact that we don't have that many options. Like if it came down to Nina versus Marianne, I'd 100% vote Nina, and Bernie versus Marianne, I'd 100% vote Bernie. In fact, here's how bad it is. It's so bad that she's lower than someone else on the list that you would probably consider lower than her, just for the sake of the fact that she's more relevant than this other person. But I literally don't get why Kyle is even floating Marianne 2024. The fact that I have to take Marianne 2024 seriously should show you that this is bad. Now here's a slightly more controversial choice. Marianne Williamson's already pretty controversial, but this is even more controversial considering this person's going to be above her. Number 7 is Jerome Segal. Now, many of you might be wondering, who? Well, Jerome Segal is a perennial candidate. He ran for Senator of Maryland in 2018 against Ben Cardin and Chelsea Manning. Then he ran for president in 2020 under the Bread and Roses Party, which was only ballot qualified in his home state of Maryland. Then he ran for Maryland governor. And now he intends to run for president in 2024 against Joe Biden. In fact, he's the only person on this list who has officially announced a presidential bid, which is the only reason why I'm including him in this list, because if anything happens, he's probably the only one that is qualified to actually be on your ballot if any situation happens. I know he's a literal nobody, but considering the fact that I am the guy that turned Andrew Yang from a nobody to a household name, I'm going to try and do the same for somebody who I think should be more worthwhile. Jerome Segal, he's a pretty good guy. I've seen his platform. He usually focuses on foreign policy and the idea of socialism, specifically bread and roses socialism, which is a term that he himself is trying to coin. But I think Jerome Segal could be an interesting candidate. He would make for an interesting protest vote in a Joe Biden administration. Like, he could be the next John Wolfe Jr., am I right? Like, legitimately, if none of these other people end up running and Jerome Segal is on my ballot, even if he's not on my ballot, I'm still 100% like endorsing Jerome Segal and like being like, Jerome Segal 2024, whatever. I'm going to be like, if he's the only guy running against Joe Biden, I'm going to be the Jerome Segal stan account. The next candidate is Matthew Hoh. Now, you might not know who Matthew Hoh is either, but let me explain. Matthew Hoh was the Green Party candidate for Senate here in North Carolina. Now, you might be wondering, Green Party? Ew, I thought you were going to talk about only Democrats. I never said that. I never said I was only going to talk about Democrats. I said I'd talk about progressive candidates running for president, and Matthew Hoh could be one of them. Now, here's the thing. Hear me now, quote me later. I 100% believe that Matthew Hoh will be the Green Party nominee come 2024. Because I've actually looked into how the Green Party 2024 ballot is currently right now. Howie Hawkins has sort of like de facto filed, even though like he filed as an independent. This one random guy, he's basically like said like he is running, but he's not really relevant. And then there's also this incel, this actual like literal incel who's run for president like 15 times and like said like he like ran like an online masturbation show of himself and he's like collaborated with like actual Nazis. That guy's also running for the Green Party nomination. But Matthew Hoh, I do believe that Matthew Hoh is probably the most set to potentially be the Green Party nominee in 2024. And you know me, I'm a believer of the inside-outside strategy. So I think Matthew Hoh would be a good choice for third-party people. And there's a big reason why. Hoh has actually been doing something interesting. He has actually been going to a lot of indie media shows to get his name out. And by extension, the Greens. And he's also been trying to facilitate like some sort of like alliance with the broader left. Progressive Democrats, Socialist Alternative. Like the thing is, like, most of the people in the Green Party, like, after the Bernie campaign, like, they've been trying to be like, oh, we're, like, super anti-Bernie now. But, like, Hoh is the only person who's actually been trying to, like, still facilitate progressives to be backing his candidacy. Like, he even applied for, like, North Carolina DSA's endorsement. It's like, the dude is trying to be, like, a new uniter. I think he could be a very interesting candidate. And if it's him, Biden, and Trump in 2024... you know who I'm backing. My vote truly will not make a difference. As Debs once said, I'd rather vote for something I want and not get it than vote for something I don't want and get it. Biden will either win without my support or lose without my support, and Hoh will either lose without my support or lose with my support. Now, the bottom 5 were the ones that are probably the least viable of the options, but 5 above are basically the ones that are the quote-unquote most viable of my options. Number 5 is Ayanna Pressley. Now, I'm actually surprised that Ayanna Pressley was at all one of the people to be floated as a potential 2024 candidate. But upon further scrutiny, it's kind of obvious as to why. Ayanna is the one member of the squad that is the most palatable to the broader Democratic Party. Unlike every other member of the squad, she's not a scary socialist. And she knows how to play the politics game. You know, rarely back against an incumbent, don't rock the boat too much, and to an extent, wait your turn. And she probably gets bonus points due to the fact that she's the only member of the squad to have actually ran against a progressive. I mean, people forget that, but like, yeah, Mike Capuano, the person who was the incumbent candidate in that seat, was already a progressive member of Congress, and was not even like one of those like, oh, he's like progressive in name only. Like, no. He was like an actual, like, legit progressive. But then Ayanna Pressley ran and replaced him. And during her campaign, she literally bluntly stated that she, like, her and him would basically vote the exact same way. And the only reason that she ran against him was because she was basically like, we need new leadership. While Ayanna is not, like, too right-wing to be just like Warren, she can still position herself to be a good compromise choice similar to Warren, but also not suffer from Warren's faults. Basically be like Katie Porter, but like actually good. Although some people argue that she would probably run for a different position in 2024, but due to the fact that that's Warren's seat, I don't think that's viable. Like, she probably won't even run for president, but the fact that she's been thrown out, she's probably a good choice. The next one is Jon Stewart. Hear me out. Stewart was the host of the most popular talk show in America. And he's been getting prominent again recently thanks to his activism on veterans issues and his new show where he's been talking a lot about a lot of things, especially things that are like changing his mind. Now, since I don't have Apple TV, I haven't been able to see his episode on trans stuff, but like his trans episode was really good because like he looked over like past statements of his that were transphobic and he was like, yeah, that's weird. And like this is the thing, like Stewart personally has identified as a socialist, so it's like, okay, that's interesting. But here's the thing, like of course there are a lot of faults with him. I can see he's not perfect on a lot of issues. Like he keeps standing like Dave Chappelle, even though he's supposedly like gotten better on trans issues. In the past, he's done like weird things. Like he's basically basically in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, he became like one of the loudest war hawks. But then like basically ever since then, he kind of rescinded that and just to be more in favor of like the veterans of the war. It's kind of cringy to rely on like a celebrity to run for president. But lastly, one of the biggest kinks into this speculation is the fact that on like July 9th, he took to Twitter to respond to all this speculation that he could run for president in 2024. And he responded, no thank you. But I still say that Stewart has a shot, but again, not top priority. Number 3 would be Ro Khanna, the precursor to the Squad, the first Justice Democrat. I have a lot of admiration for Ro Khanna, and so too does a lot of the progressive movement. He's been seen as sort of the next phase of the Bernie movement since 2017. Some even considered him for a potential 2020 run, but you know, Bernie. So now we have some in the Bernie camp that are pushing for Ro 2024. But we have a lot of issues regarding it. The people pushing for Ro 2024 are some of the worst members of the Bernie camp, particularly Jeff Weaver, the guy who was the reason why Bernie didn't campaign to black people. I'm not kidding. The reason why Bernie has that stigma of not being appealable to black people is specifically because of Jeff Weaver, because Jeff Weaver specifically told Bernie to not waste his time and campaign in those areas because I guess he just felt that they wouldn't like Bernie anyways. And many people even say that Jeff Weaver is one of the reasons why his campaign failed in 2020 because he essentially just was pulling the plugs very early on, even though he wasn't even the campaign manager anymore. But the bigger one that is interesting is that something I mentioned very early on in the episode, Feinstein's seat is up for grabs in 2024, and it seems that Dems are really, really trying to pressure Feinstein to retire, and a lot of people are looking into the seat, one of which happens to be Ro Khanna. And here's the thing, whereas all the other people would probably not run against her if she actually was stupid enough to actually run for another term, Ro would actually be the one person that could actually still run against her, because he has a long-standing history of sort of being anti-democratic establishment. Primarying incumbent Democrat Tom Lantos in 2004, primarying Mike Honda in 2014 and 2016, endorsing Kevin De Leon's bid against Feinstein in 2018, and openly talking about primarying Alex Padilla in 2022. So Ro would probably be one of those people who are in that Bernie umbrella of Senate endorsements that he would tote for his 2024 bid. Number 2, this is a dark horse that I really have just been really interested in the idea of. Keith Ellison. Keith used to be the representative from Minnesota District 5. Now he's Minnesota Attorney General. He was also the DNC deputy chair after losing the top spot in 2017. He seems like a very oddball choice. Like some of these choices would seem as oddball, but like Keith Ellison, he seems like a really oddball choice. Former representative, now attorney general? That's a weird position to like come into to become president. Now, here are some reasons why. First, Muslim president, based. Second, Ellison is a long-standing true blue progressive ever since he entered politics, based. 3, the one that sort of kickstarted me looking into this was his position as Minnesota Attorney General put him in the position of special prosecutor in the Derek Chauvin case. And after that case was decided, every media pundit agreed that Keith Ellison basically became became the new face for progressivism. Like, immediately after the case, not immediately, but like a couple of days after the case, I was like, let me look at something. And I looked up Keith Ellison 2024, and sure enough, there were a lot of tweets of people saying they wanted Keith Ellison to run for president in 2024. Keith Ellison, he basically primed himself to be he was in the right place at the right time to be a good progressive in that field. And the last reason sort of ties into that reason. Keith Ellison is really smart. Keith Ellison thinks 10 steps ahead of everybody else. People will ridicule him, people will mock him, and people will be mad at him for whatever decision he makes at the time. But then in a couple of years, that decision is proven to be completely right. During the Republican primaries, Keith Ellison was desperately telling Democrats 100% they need to rush, they need to turn out people to vote, they need to make sure that people are ready to vote because Trump is building up momentum and that people need to be afraid about the fact that he might be leading the Republican ticket. And pundits literally laughed in his face when he said that. Sure enough, he was 100% proven right. In the aftermath of the Bernie campaign, he was saying they need to make sure to be prepared for DeSantis 2024. People ridiculed him then. Now the Republicans are basically trying to run him into the way to defeat Trump. And the biggest one was actually one that I can even acknowledge I was wrong about. Back in 2018, Al Franken resigned from his Senate seat. And many people were thinking that Keith Ellison could run for that Senate seat. But instead, Keith Ellison chose to not run for that Senate seat, but also forego running for his House seat, instead running for Minnesota Attorney General. I was so mad at him for that decision that I could not endorse his Attorney General bid, and I didn't even endorse his re-election bid. Technically, I didn't give an official endorsement, but I was very openly yes, I still like Keith Ellison, but on principle, him foregoing that Senate seat, I was no, he shouldn't have done that. But then, as I was looking into this and thinking about Keith Ellison, I finally started thinking, why did he even choose to forego for this specific one? So then I looked it up, and I found out Keith Ellison's very explicit reason as to why, and Keith Ellison explained that he knew that in the Trump administration, the justice system would very heavily lean right due to the fact that Trump would be allowed to appoint a ton of justices. So he felt there needed to be progressive prosecutors in the field so that they could stand up against him. So it's literally Keith was 100% right again. Keith Ellison is literally sitting here playing 18D chess while we're sitting here twiddling our thumbs and playing with our dicks or something. Keith is smart. Keith is a good egg. I would 100% be on board with Keith Ellison 2024. This is legitimately I'd put him at number one only if he was more interested in the position. But since he really only had that short instance of him being considered a viable candidate, I can't necessarily put him any higher than that. But I would definitely want him to run the most. But the number one person to potentially run in 2024 is... There's really no point in a drum roll. We all know it's AOC. It's 100% AOC. Realistically, after Nina Turner's 2 failed bids, AOC is literally the best bet. To be blunt, who else do we have? I mean, aside from the fact that I stated a bunch of people that we have, but again, who else logistically do we have? AOC is the largest name, ergo she's sort of the de facto leader of the progressive socialist movement. I see the one criticism that people are going to get. She's not old enough. Technically, she is. She'd be 1 year off for basically the entirety of the election, but she will be the age of presidency when it's time for her to actually serve. Now, the fact that the number one is very underwhelming, it just kind of details this very sad fact that I just have to acknowledge. We really don't have that many options. especially since Biden seems very likely to potentially announce a 2024 bid any minute now. The only thing I want is for this episode to not be dated by the time it's posted, at least be dated like a week after being posted. I guess there is one thing that I should say for the remainder of this episode before we go, and it's the fact that I actually, like I said before, I actually did hold a poll amongst people regarding the 2024 election cycle. 17 people responded, and that was after I got like a ton of people to get a lot of traction to try and make sure that this is a very big result. And yeah, that's very disappointing, the fact that, again, very small amount of people actually care about what I do. Anyways, let's just get into like the general like whatevers. Okay, so first question was, would you support a primary bid against Joe Biden? 15 people said yes, 2 people said no. Then I said, would you support Bernie Sanders running a third time? 14 said yes, 3 said no. Then for the next question was, if Bernie chooses to forego a 2024 run, who should run instead? And I included a couple of the names that I mentioned in this. I included basically all the names that I mentioned in this video. Jerome Segal, AOC, John K. Fetterman, Mandela Barnes, Nina Turner, Jeff Merkley, Rashida Tlaib, Keith Ellison, Ayanna Pressley, Gary Chambers, Charles Booker, Lucas Coons, J.B. Pritzker, Philip Murphy, Marianne Williamson, Jon Stewart, Ro Khanna, and Jay Inslee. And here's basically all the ones. J.B. Pritzker, Ro Khanna, Jay Inslee, and Jerome Segal all got 1 vote. Alright? Now, of all the other people, okay, let's see. Marianne Williamson, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and Gary Chambers, and John K. Fetterman got 2 votes. And the winner of the poll on this one, Jon Stewart, got 3 votes. Okay, so the next one was a very interesting one to see. I said, if the Democratic progressive option fails, what will you do for the general election? And what happened was 12% said, like 12 people said support the Democratic nominee, and 5 people said support a minor party candidate. Now that's interesting, probably just because of this channel, but I guess over all the years, this channel, like some of the people in the audience have generally been more of like the blue no matter who type progressive. Okay, but for the last option, I said, if you were to support a minor party candidate, which of these would be most likely for you to be supporting? And the options I put were Jill Stein, Matthew Ho, Howie Hawkins, Jimmy Dore, Jesse Ventura, Gloria Riva, Allison Kennedy, and Vermin Supreme. And also the last option, I would back a minor party, but none of these options, which a former associate of mine basically said, like, yeah, unfortunately, that option basically became the de facto I wouldn't back a minor party nominee. So that one ended up winning with 6 people voting for it. But the other ones, like Matthew Ho and Vermin Supreme, got 1 vote, and Gloria LaRiva and Jesse Ventura got 3, and so did Jill Stein. So yeah, that's basically how people would go for 2024, at least on the people that I know. If you have any options for 2024 that you want, leave a comment below. If it's not any of the people I said in this video, I'm just going to sit there and argue that you're wrong. This Thursday, a video about the United States party switch will be uploaded. And next week's podcast will be me taking another political quiz. But this political quiz was apparently so bad that the user who posted it faced a lot of severe harassment because of it. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if there's more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check out my articles on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.